I'm Susie Bielak, the Associate Director of Public and Interpretive Programs, and I am thrilled for the talk that will unfold tonight. To begin, Krzysztof Wodiczko has said, "You cannot work towards peace by being peaceful." He says, if peace is where everybody's quiet and doesn't open up, share what's unspeakable, offer unsolicited criticism, defend others' rights to speak and encourage discourse, that peace is worth nothing. Wodiczko likens this kind of peace to that secured in Poland under communist regime. To him, it's the death of democracy that might have consequences as bad as war. He says, to prevent the world from bloody conflict, we must sustain a certain kind of adversarial life in which we are struggling with our problems in public. So Krzysztof Wodiczko has been inviting others to share their struggles in public for over 30 years. Since 1980, he's extended the function of public buildings and monuments by using them as malleable canvases to examine issues such as human rights, democracy, truth, violence, trauma, and collective memory. He's also developed a series of personal instruments, technology designed to facilitate survival, communication, and healing for collaborators. Since the 90s, Wodiczko has employed these technologies and projections with various communities around the world. The resulting works combine iconic visual statements and searing testimonials. For example, in 2004, he produced a projection at the St. Louis Public Library. This projection consisted of audio testimony by half a dozen St. Louis residents who had lost loved ones to violent acts, and with that, intercut remorseful stories of prisoners now serving time for such acts. Accompanying each speaker's voice were projected images of their hands, gesturing emotively onto the library's facade. In Tijuana, Mexico, he collaborated with female workers in the maquiladora industry, free trade sweatshop factories. The women wore media technology designed to project their faces onto El Centro Cultural, which is a large building at the heart of the city, as they spoke of incest, police abuse, and workplace discrimination, all in real time. In this case, as with many, participants spoke at great risk to themselves for the purpose of moral and political change. A fundamental element of Wodiczko's process is building trust. Many of the participants in the projects publicly speak what is unspeakable. These very abbreviated examples, which touch only a small swath of Wodiczko's work, begin to give just a sense of the political, social, and psychological charge, and the very many questions that it opens, including, most relevant to today, how to activate public space as a site to explore and enact democracy. John Rajchman, a philosopher working in the areas of art history, architecture, and continental philosophy, has long engaged these questions in dialogue with Krzysztof Wodiczko about his work, in particular, positioning it in the context of agonistic democracy. Tonight, we bring their conversation to you to discuss the terms, tools, and tactics of agonism through the many lenses of Krzysztof's work, and with the hope of addressing, to start, these ongoing questions. What are the limits and demands of working with strangers? What is the distinction between difference and conflict? What is the relationship between agonism and theater? And finally, what are the roles of voice, interrogation, testimony, and truth-telling in agonism? Please join me in welcoming Krzysztof Wodiczko and John Rajchman.
Well, thanks so much for the invitation to continue my conversations with Krzysztof, which have gone on for some time now, have been very interesting and rewarding for me. And I'd like to say something a little bit about those conversations, since they involved a practice of philosophers and people trained more in philosophy with artists in a setting which has to do with politics. And those discussions have developed over the years. Sometimes they've even become public. We started, I guess, a little bit at MIT, and their new Warren Sack, and I gather has played an important role in devising this symposium, supported by Northern Lights, the very interesting questions that are posed about agonism and dissensus. I thought today what we could do is maybe look at some particular works of Krzysztof Wodiczko and see how these problems of agonism and discord figure. And perhaps I should say that in looking at the program, the different ways those ideas have developed, the idea of agonism itself, its connection to game or play, which seems to be developed in an interesting way in the symposia that was followed, all strikes me as very interesting. I think the issue of agonism and antagonism and those words owe a good deal to the work of our friend Chantal Mouffe, who's influenced us both, I think, in talking about this. And it's very interesting to observe how Chantal's work has been influential and taken up in many different ways. We know, for example, there's a discussion that Claire Bishop helped to inaugurate. What does this problem of agonism have to do with what's called relational or participatory artworks? She drew a lot of distinctions having to do with that. Recently, she's worked in architecture with Marcus Meeson. They published a book called The Nightmare of Participation, with a long interview. Marcus Meeson is very much involved with young architectural projects, rethinking public space. So maybe just a first very general question to Krzysztof. It strikes me when I think of his work, but perhaps we'll already have a disagreement about that, that part of what's interested in the way he uses this problem of agonism is that it's connected to many other different aspects. And among those aspects are this problem of public and private. We know about Hannah Arendt, the way she developed those ideas. This problem of testimony, the problem of trauma, the problem of conflict. So I think he brings to this problem of agonism a very distinctive and interesting set of ideas. For me, Chantal's focus is more on parliamentary practices and how artists can excite or provoke a different kind of parliamentary discussion. Whereas many of these works by Krzysztof strike me as almost involved in a kind of pre-political space where the sides have not yet been settled, and the testimony, the interesting way the body figures in the work and so forth, the way the guts in this kind of Brechtian way forms part of the work, adds a dimension that's very specific and interesting. And I thought in looking at these projects, we could maybe focus a little bit on that. So I just wanted to first ask Krzysztof, before we actually looked at the works, how this vocabulary about agonism and antagonism that Chantal has introduced, how he came acquainted with it, in what way he found it useful, what kind of engagement it helped him in his own work.
Well, first of all, I have to start with my life in Poland and the previous regime, because those who experience unfreedom and inequality and some form of tyranny know probably the best what democracy at least should be offering. So my journey when I left Poland was in search for this democracy that was not there in Poland. I thought that since it was somehow taken away from us, I will find it somewhere, right there, right? And just enjoy it. And quickly I realized it doesn't work this way. In fact, it's a job. You cannot find democracy. You have to make one. And in fact, every day, there's some kind of process that you have to learn, an obligation, in fact. So I started to read about this and go through various books and became a student, trying to educate myself, since nobody educated me in Poland. And that's how I guess became professor. So, well, I went through various texts to which actually Chantal Mouffe refers, and now, of course, there are more she's bringing up, somehow surrounding her own concept by all other concepts, and to clarify her own position. So, in fact, several days ago, I was honored to introduce her in public. He, an artist, introduces political philosophers in Harvard. I think that says something about cross-disciplinarity. But anyway, it's quite a very brave kind of project for me, of course. But I just realized that her way of her propositions influenced so many fields: urban geography, cultural geography, even social psychology, even policy making. And so it's not just arts. There's an enormous amount of people who are reading and actually bringing a meaning to it. So I was one of those people. I realized that speaking about Chantal Mouffe is the way to actually start gaining more connections, find friends, actually trying to understand it together. So, of course, that's what happened to us. And, yes, thanks to Warren Sack, whom connected us. So, of course, I just realized it's just she's a reference to so many conversations. And art world, actually, very much. And a design world also was just trying to learn from her a lot. So, I don't know exactly how it happened, but she invited also me to various conferences and lectures in Vienna, and we met together with John on various occasions. So that's how it happened. But I think there's one, you're right, John, that she is counting on us to kind of reactualize and contextualize and maybe introduce to her framework all sorts of ideas, and she's very happy when people do so. So it's not to blame her for it, it's actually to congratulate that she opens up to this. In terms of art, there are other artists who, with whom she is on friendly relations, such as Yes Men. I think that maybe there will be even more appropriate team to actually discuss agonism. But also she likes certain aspects of what he calls beauty in my own work. It's always embarrassing for me a little bit to use this term. But she is doing polemically, as she is, provocatively. In fact, she's introducing there's nothing wrong with beauty, she says, because it can be perverted. So it is a kind of hegemonic thing. The beauty appears as a part of some kind of common sense aesthetics that is being kind of presented to us, or we are drawn into this. So why not take that maybe drive or need, but also operation of beauty, as a part of kind of aesthetic machine that glues together various things in us and among each other as a kind of one, I don't want to say ideology, let's say hegemony. So why not take this and turn it around and actually bring the issue that shouldn't be there and still carry on in this kind of theater of aesthetics. So she accepts these tactics very much, and she likes what some artists did to some advertising projects, such as Benetton, actually taking advantage of this kind of pseudo-pluralism that Benetton proposes, and then insert it into much harsher, precise references to what is being silenced, and this kind of hegemonic art is trying to not show. So that's what actually came out several days ago when people started to squeeze her, say, Chantal, give some examples. So she actually did mention Benetton and Hiroshima projection, for example. So this is how it works. Yet there are issues she's not referring to, and that's how I'm focusing on those. Because we mentioned trauma, we mentioned body. She is into passion. She thinks that this agonistic democracy cannot operate without passion that actually inserts kind of subjectivity into this, the experience, lived experience, and so forth. So, in fact, we are in the same here on the same plane. But what is important? That actual society is extremely divided. If we take returning soldiers from Iraq and Afghanistan, they come back as completely different people, most of them very different, and some serious part of them traumatized. They actually are very different. They know a lot, what they didn't know before they joined the war. They would like to, some of them, transmit that to younger generations, so they will not go through the same next time, or hopefully will not happen even occasion for it, such as war. So this 1% of people only speak. Among those, only 1% speaks, and almost none of their families do. So to create opportunity for those people to develop their capacity to open up and share unspeakable experiences, find form for it, emotionally charged form, transmitted, it's almost an obligation. Well, that means that this agonism here is attached to developmental projects. So the political projects and ethical projects, which I agree here with Chantal, are two different things that are in some kind of dynamic relations. It's not the same, meaning political equality, ethical focus on concrete existential human situation that is unequal, fine. But if you take this particular group and try to create conditions for them to add to this agonistic pluralism, democratic process, as major actors, animators of discourse, provocateurs, as those parrhesiastes, right, in ancient Greece. Well, you need architecture for them. I'm referring to the title here. You need equipment. You need also process. You need a kind of workshop, protective space in time, so they will overcome their incapacitation caused by the very things that they should communicate, meaning their throat will not be closed when they even start talking, but will eventually open up. This process is a combination of, it's a social psychology issue, and it's ethical issue, and it's political issue. And there may be some other aspects of it. Aesthetic issue, definitely, because through cultural project, such transmission can happen easier, and Chantal should agree with this. So we have to create symbolic channel for communication, where the antagonism is being turned into agonism through symbolic space. So it can find form, which is a different form than violence. So in a sense, violence of experience of those people can be shared through testimony. Here, testes, protest are connected, right? Testes, it's a witness. Protest is I project what I witnessed as something so towards something better. I guess situation there will be no other people won't have to go through this myself. So it's a kind of utopia, which I refer as no place, but or good place, meaning so-called good place, meaning the place, no place, the place I refuse to accept today. In hope that voicing this, I will create conditions in which there will be no place for such place in the future, for myself, for my children, for all of you. So that is the kind of situation that requires equipment, requires cultural project. It requires lots of people involvement, not myself in this case, but someone who will be between me, the project, and those people who are veterans in this case, or their family and their families, a social worker, an activist, a psychotherapist, or investigative journalist, someone whom those people will trust, and who hopefully will trust the project, so then they will start trusting the project through that person. So with this team, they have all sorts of people. It's a festival, you need curators, you need apparatus, media apparatus, people who produce things, the multimedia kind of production people. You need a social and technical coordinator. You need like minimum 30 people, maybe 100 people sometimes, to really develop project over a year. So those people can try again, record, re-record, prepare themselves for that transmission through workshops and so forth. So this kind of work, it creates what I'm saying, the kind of public that is inside of the project, which I call inner public of the project, which is very much connected with larger public, with the city, with the world, with media. And it's there also often during the public presentation and whatever interactions to protect as a buffer zone. There are lawyers. There's an enormous amount of people. So it means this is a kind of process in which people also argue and question each other, and they also leave, never come back. Somebody else comes back. It's not for everybody. It's a specific intervention, which requires lots of work and back and forth, but that is a position that is being created collectively, but as a particular group that is a wedge that through this kind of hegemony, and tries to appropriate architecture, public space, media, that hegemonic thing, perverted a little bit, inserted temporary basis, not for too long, because it will probably corrupt itself if it continues on permanent basis. So this is how it works. So now maybe I can show something, because I've been talking too much about it. So this war veteran vehicle started in Denver during the Democratic Convention. There was no word about veterans, not much, during the whole electoral campaign. Now we're talking about a war which now ends. Masses of soldiers will come back. It's different than during the Democratic Convention in Denver. It's just the beginning of the war. It's not the end of the war. It's a major clinical problem for the next 50 years in this country. Those people already went to war many times and came back. So they have been, some of them, traumatized and re-traumatized. So their conditions, some of them are much worse than, I'm talking about those who are traumatized, seriously. They re-traumatize 7 to 9 people. That's the statistics. So you can imagine a number of people traumatized. The war very different than any other war before, because so many people are coming back alive because of advancement of medical technology, armament, and tactics. So because they are alive, there's a problem. You know, they are. We have to live with them. They have to live with us. They are different than they were. We have to somehow connect. But there is a wall between those who know what war is and those who don't. Very thick. Although those who know what war is are also families of veterans and those who are re-traumatized. So that's why this vehicle was designed to continue the war. So the veterans, it's a Humvee with the part which is very often used as a projectile unit in the back, was transformed into projection unit. So they could throw, project, or reject and project, or somehow try to break that wall, or it's impossible to break that wall, but they can shake that wall. So that's why the project has very acoustic nature. But anyway, this is how the architecture, the kind of traditional sense, is here, because it's a redesigned machine. Of course, you have here words that are projected. So those
We're
are
all hard here. The ones that aren't giving in, the tougher ones, living day by day out there, just like out in Iraq or in Vietnam or in Korea.
The first step to me in solving problems of veterans is not making so damn many of them.
Now, those are homeless veterans. The project in Denver was only with homeless veterans, with the cooperation with Colorado Coalition for the Homeless and Veteran Administration Hospital and several other organizations, like America Road Home and a few other places, like housing for homeless and so forth.
People don't understand what a flashback
This is a project in
Certain things will bring it out and spoil your day.
Liverpool. In Britain, the situation is different because there are much less of veterans, but they are saying the same thing. It's about post-traumatic stress, about their own reactions to public space. Public space is the worst places because that's the worst thing can happen. They are constantly looking for snipers, for roadside bombs, for suicide bombers.
Because I feel vulnerable.
The Prime Minister, I'd ask you why haven't the soldiers got prior to certain...
These are various things discussed here. This is in Poland. I have no translation because I also work with Afghanistan, veterans from Afghanistan in Warsaw, and also in Eindhoven, Dutch. So just to give you a little a sense of what they say.
It's the first step to me in solving problems of veterans.
Nikolai, I miss you.
I just couldn't believe it.
This is important because here there is a wife of veteran who presents herself as proper veteran of veteran, the survivor of the survivor, who is talking about the moment when her husband almost killed her, something he does not remember. So husband also took part in the same project, so they were firing the truth of their experience together.
I'm saying that the way he was talking to me, the looks he was giving me, I was like, oh my God, I think he could actually kill me now. He could put his hands around my throat and strangle me, you know. And I mean, it wasn't nasty. I'd just say, do you want a cup of tea? But the look in his eyes, and I thought, I can't do this. It was just, he could have killed me. Even now he does it to me. And he looks at me as if I'm shite.
So he is speaking.
You wouldn't believe what I put her through. That was from 1982, after I come back. When I went to Germany in 1984-ish, 83-ish, I nearly strangled her. I can't remember that. She said, you had me up against the wall, Rob. I said, I can't remember.
So those...
and an Iraqi man came up with his young baby.
Importantly, that they were very forcefully punched into those facades. In other words, those facades, those monuments at which this battle station was directed, were not innocent sites. They were implicated somehow. They're landmarks. They've been witnessing other things. So it's still, I'm engaging still monuments. But in fact, what is most important is that those people are monuments. They are living monuments to their trauma. So they are the ones who are new monuments in the city. So the issue of memory here is also important, and that's what, when you have an official memory that is being celebrated in those various symbolic structures in urban environment. And then there are the new monuments, like immigrants, there are new monuments, the homeless are monuments, there are veterans who are new monuments. So this, you have a kind of agonistic memory, as Chantal would like. So maybe I will stop for a moment, and we can maybe elaborate a little more on this.
It's very striking to see these works and to hear about the involvement of these veterans. Perhaps one question has to do, you said earlier that there's kind of different levels, that there's a kind of ethical level, a symbolic, political level, an aesthetic level. Mm-hmm. The problem is to create psychological level, to sort of create this pre-public through the process in which these various elements come together. But it seems that those interventions are temporary is a bad word because they obviously have effects on lots of people, but they're not things that obviously connect to big political movements that are going to transform things. So it seems that your artistic and public intervention has a kind of very specific and interesting role. And I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that.
The specific role is actually to create certain kind of conflict on temporary basis, but just to keep working on various issues and engage others in those projects, and hope that other people who work in the other areas, whether they are in research or in theater or in film or literature, I mean, there are some people with whom we have a commonality here in terms of similar approach. So this creates certain level of conflictual quality in the democratic process. I think that the issue is that the conflict here has to be understood also from social psychology point of view, not only from political theory point of view. It's interesting way that agonistic democracy is connected with conflict theory in terms of conflict transformation theory, not conflict management, not conflict resolution even, but conflict transformation. That means that conflict that is malignant, that is pregnant with awful things to be born, needs to be transformed. First of all, into symbolic communication that I mentioned before. So without conflict, there is no life. Not only for Chantal Mouffe, but also for psychologists and for sociologists, anthropologists. So those projects are bringing certain conditions for conflict to find form. And this is by people arguing or people who even are in disagreement with what they are witnessing or they are producing even. But they still are working, they have a kind of conflictual situation inside of themselves. So it's touching up of our kind of agonism inside of us. Maybe Nietzsche or other people would have something to say about this. So it's temporary, but maybe that's its virtue. In fact, Chantal likes everything to be somehow temporary. You know, it is the process has to have to shift always. It's a kind of continuing. When there is not enough of work done in some areas, we have to focus and jump on this. So this kind of democracy is. She likes Derrida, something to come, something avenir, something a horizon. So the projects cannot be finished but they cannot reach what people would call consensus here. It's not possible that suddenly the owners of maquiladora factories will embrace those. I will show a fragment of this soon, of those workers who are basically deprived of any access to rights or conditions of life are below imagination. So no, it will not happen this way. The projects cannot produce this. But I think that by cultural, because it's a festival, because there's enormous amount of media, for those projects, lots of journalists and also to go through internet and television and radio. So suddenly the project will be part of a continuing discussion and debate. So that's important to remember that in the public space, projects like this only part of a larger project of other people who frame it, interpret it, and somehow argue over it or record it and show its time later under different context. I didn't maybe answer to your question well. Maybe it will come up later. But I surrounded it with some other thoughts.
Well, those thoughts are very interesting. Maybe it's good to maybe multiply. We have a kind of pluralistic discussion. When we think of the political and maybe even aesthetic dimensions of war, we find ourselves in a situation where we have this incredible war machine that's developed in a very specific way.
The culture of war.
The culture of war, the particular form that warfare takes now, the way in which these soldiers have been recruited, the relation that they have to the rest of
They use those vehicles, recruiters.
Yeah,
their vehicles are even better than mine because they have more money and equipment. Those Humvees are equipped with audiovisual kind of brainwashing weapons. Well, they actually are real weapons, and they are plasma screens, and there are various sounds. It's very attractive. And they have full right to enter to schools. While those who are against war, the anti-war kind of groups, are not allowed. So, of course, I'm sorry for inserting this, but
it's all right.
it's about kind of re-articulation, as Talmud would call, of this hegemonic apparatus here.
Yeah, no, I was a little bit interested in this problem of war, how it figures in your work. Of course, this Hiroshima projection that Chantal was interested in, a very interesting example of that, because it has directly to do with this bomb and the role that it had in the war. Also the way that bombing of Hiroshima has created a situation that's still going on in Asia, but also it was very much the source of the discussion about trauma and post-traumatic stress. And also in the sentences that were quoted in the beginning, where you were talking, were quoted as talking about peace and war. So it seems that there's several different ways in which your work intersects with, let's say, larger political and historical questions, of which one has to do with war, another has to do with economics, with work, with homeless people, but this war one strikes me as having an increased importance, perhaps, in your work, and a second and related question having to do with these problems of monuments. You've worked recently with this Arc de Triomphe project, which has to do with a monument in war, and have yourself built a monument. I guess we're not showing these things. I just wanted to...
We're showing something, but just a little bit of an entertainment. But yes, I'm more and more worried about this war because people seem to get used to the fact that the war is, and it will be, and it was. As if you told people in 19th century or late 18th century that slavery has to be abolished, they would think you're crazy. Well, no, that's what happens when you say that war has to be abolished. They think you're crazy. The war will always be. Well, the legality of war, legality of slave trade, I think they both can be abolished, were abolished. So I am focused on this, and I am, of course, the product of war. My generation, we are kind of experts, not on the war as such, but on the culture of war and the impact of war on next generations. So, obviously, and also war memorials. Somewhere between war memorials, there is Poland, people say. So if you go to Washington, D.C., you might think the same. It's like a fortress of war memorial. And in fact, United States launched 160 military interventions since 1880. So it's like 1 year, more or less. But people don't learn it in textbooks. However, maybe if they learn it would be better. So maybe that's one project, pedagogical project would help. But in any case, war is there and homelessness is there. Now they are interconnected, strange enough, going back to earlier project. And the immigration and migration is coming back as well. So I cannot stop working on certain topics. I may think I should have a right to have new topics, to deal with new problems. I mean, there's nothing worse to have the same problem all the time, but unfortunately we do. Look at what's happening with immigration issues in Europe right now, and as much as the war issue. So that's why maybe the immigrant instruments, the very early projects that I've done, as you see here, it's about the relationship between person on the left and the couple on the right. The person on the left is avoiding the gaze on the people on the right. They deport him, basically, with their gaze, because they're afraid of him, more than he of them, probably, because he is the kind of evidence he brings to the surface something that is hidden, bring to light something that ought to be hidden, uncanny situation of strangeness. They are no strangers, of course, they don't want to be strangers. Well, we, him, we are because we are not him. So now here, it's that strangeness that needs to be deported, not this person, because it's inconvenient. What will happen if they acknowledge their own strangeness? The whole thing will fall apart. So the issue is how to equip this person to offer unsolicited speech communication, speak of own conditions and own perspective and point of view on the world for them who are afraid of him. So how can those people come closer, and how can this person open up? It needs an artifice. So that was in 1990s, right? The first Le Pen situation. And now we have Sarkozy, we have another Le Pen. So a third wave of xenophobia since those projects. So here they are, those walking sticks that have containers for inserting in them important relics, documents, things that witness displacement, and at the top the odd kind of little monitors and speakers. So they could, all of those things that there's always too late to formulate, or there's no time to really find words for it. All of those things are recorded, re-recorded, inscribed into these instruments so they can be companions to immigrants. They are kind of speaking on their behalf, but then they can be disrupted and something else can be said that is not recorded yet, and so forth. So this is important reference to Ronap and other equipment. There are prosthetic devices, cultural prosthetic devices. I think they could be somehow discussed in terms of agonistic pluralism, in the sense that they have this disruptive aspect and performative. So you mentioned body. Here, this kind of equipment develops act of speech, which is bodily, performative in public space, and also develops this testimony. Spoken in I'm very see those gestures. People are pointing out, they're asking, what's there? Why did you put it there? So the answer is, oh, I'm just talking about it. The top of this stick is talking. Or, none of your business. Yeah, it's there because it needs to be there. I need to. So also the issue is time. Those people, their time, the most precious value in human life is stolen from them. Time. Because they wait for documents endlessly. They're being processed by some bureaucracies, and they are not even allowed to work in many places over so time. So of course, to find a form to express it, it's very difficult to really explain to people this, because they are in so different situations. So this is the case.
Som symboliserar tid.
I think that's in Swedish, time. I am not sure. Probably.
Alla invandrare, tiden är mycket viktig. Man vet att man åker utomlands. Men sen, i början tänker man efter 2 år.
They're philosophers, John. Because they are specialists on law, they are legal experts, they are philosophers, they are storytellers, they are kind of... They are doctors as well. They are both patients and doctors, right? Because they heal the society. They try to explain that there's something wrong here. I see it. There's something wrong for everybody. So those are the other more prosthetic treatments, like mixture of gag and megaphone. So important here is to trying to that such person could actually speak better with the equipment. Ideally, if we could develop such speaking apparatuses, like you see here what's happening, it's a Baroque speech. You could speak in new ways. Like Krzysztof said that immigrants have Baroque personality. Yeah. So, I mean, so this is what led to other equipment. Speaking of architecture, one is speaking through one's own back for Japanese youth. With pre-recorded and real-time speech. So that's important reference, because without this, so you have this. So you speak through your back, and you have a rear view mirror or additional video to watch interlocutor standing behind you. It's very important. Mediated communication. It's the only possibility for in some cultural situations. Well, this. Right.
目は見えますか？うん。見えるよ。目は見えますか？見える見える。よかった。今何してると思いますか？
No.
よう、わかるね。
Is this political?
いや、ちょっと。
Clinical? Critical? Ethical?
ちょっとよく黙って
psychotherapeutic,
今
aesthetic,
お仕事入りとかですか？
architectural, all of them, I think. So here there is this woman who, teenage woman, senior high school student. Her father left the family without word and penny, disappeared, is being blamed for everything by mother. So she decided to go to cafeteria where there are lots of similar people like her father, similar situation, I guess, armed with this equipment. Very uneasy. Here there is kind of inner agonism. She worked lots of ways before she got to this point.
うわーすごい目が見えるウインクしてウインクしてすごい
それでいきなり飛び出していったので
あなたはね、じゃあその現象を見てどんなふうに思う？
すごく苦しかったです。私としてはなんで生まれてきたのかなって思って。
こんな状態だからそんなことが喋れるよね、面と向かったらね、でもさ、そういったことを乗り越えて幸せになってよ、ね、そのためにはよ、いい恋愛をしていい旦那を探さないとな、ね、頑張ってね。
ありがとうございます。
でも負けないでよ。の。
There's no solution, but there is some form, symbolic form, through which there is some communication. Perhaps it is in tune with our topic. Yeah. So this, of course, led to the project which combines the projection with instrument. Because if one could be a living monument to own trauma and actually project oneself, like this young woman, it's possible also to do it through the facade, through the face of the building, of the prestigious monument, historical structure that witnessed grand events. So here we have a person who's wearing a wearable projection. It was designed at MIT, when I work at MIT, with this interrogative design group. So I have to really thank institution and members of interrogative design group. Warren Sack was connected with it. That we actually could develop this very simple, actually, equipment that allowed for animation of the facade with your face, perfect. No matter where your face was, it was always there, right? Because it was fixed. But this was used for a year for recording, re-recording, with the hope that it can be used in real time, not in pre-recorded, and it happened. So we have here this whole system that allowed to. So it started this way. You see the La Bola, this building, El Centro Cultural in Tijuana, started to speak. That's the beginning of projection. The nightmare. Well, it's because most of those stories were actually on the border between life and nightmare. This person became black. White person became black as a result of being poisoned by a solvent in maquiladora factory. And she was given aspirin and some kind of liquids, gels, and never acknowledged actually she was poisoned. So she will be speaking about this and other things through this building in a mixture of pre-recorded and real-time speech in front of lots of people, including all of that inner public, all of those people who gathered there.
Empecé a trabajar en la empresa Sunrise de México.
Sunrise. This projector, no, this is Barco. Maybe also assembled in Tijuana. Because that's the idea, the parts coming from various countries, they assemble and send to original market.
El ensamble se
So,
trata
yeah.
de sillas de...
Story.
Voy a contar una experiencia que tuve con unos compañeros. Bueno, flechas que indicaban el
So
paso
here we have
donde ir.
just little fragments of various stories, some of them comical. I don't have time to show them because there's lots of a performative talent among each group section of society. So they really became artists in this project, co-artists in this project, using this equipment. So I think that this type of cultural conflict, dealing with conflict as a cultural project, means like this, could be probably embraced both by psychotherapists and social psychologists, those who work on conflicts. And I know that some artists are involved in projects like this, in conflict, post-conflict situations, and even in conflict zones, along the border between Palestine, in Israel, Palestine, but also in post-conflict situations where people are sadly, melancholically enjoying so-called peace, the kind of so traumatized and so tired of all of the conflict that they just don't want to deal with any problems, and they are kind of suppressing all of this inside of them. So this is called negative peace, according to some conflict theorists. So to turn it into positive peace, that really, or to which there was a reference to this in introduction to our talk, this is could be actually only done through cultural and artistic projects. Now, this is not in order to create solution or consensus, but the opposite, to actually bring up all of the burning and difficult issues, so people will start really confronting each other and exchanging their positions on those issues.
Well, I see it's...
I think we covered
very many things, and I'm sure there's very many questions from the audience, and I would like to open things up to them. I don't know what the time constraints are, but we should.
We should.
Definitely. No questions.
Oh, I'm sure they are. We just don't see much because lights are against our eyes.
We have runners who will be passing mics around, so keep your hands up and we'll find you.
Look at that, I got a first question. I apologize in advance because I think it's going to be a difficult question, but I specifically want to ask Mr. Wodiczko about the Tijuana project. And if you indulge me for a second, I want to preface this by an image that the project conjured up for me. I was reminded of Orson Welles, George Orwell's 1984, and I was thinking about the infamous room 120-something, where the protagonist is confronted with his worst fear, rats or something, and there's a cage put around his head, and the rats are in the cage, gnawing on his face. And I greatly admire your work. I think it's a fabulous body of work. But this project specifically left me very conflicted because I was reminded of that image, and I couldn't shake off this perception, trying to think about these women essentially finding themselves in that situation, having to face their worst fear, the darkest nightmares, and all the while having their head encased in a cage much like the one from Orwell's novel, entirely impossible of escaping the gaze of the camera, staring right in their face, practically palpable. It's a really powerful image, and I once again, I truly respect and admire the work, and I was shocked by that experience from looking at the documentation of the project. I couldn't figure out what to do with that image, and here tonight we have an amazing opportunity. I get to hear straight from the master himself. Thank you.
Well, I've been seeing this work perhaps too much, or trying to see it, through the eyes and bodies and minds of people who decided to speak, which is an extremely brave act, since it is a matter of life and death for some people. So some people decided that it's safer for them to expose themselves like this because, well, specifically, one of those women put her husband into prison for incest. And he was about to come out, and everybody knew that all what he was talking about is to kill her. So she thought it's very good to be exposed like this. But some people couldn't do it for their own safety, and some others, they very calculated risk here. So now, for 7 months process of wearing it in the studio in order to really stabilize this image, they didn't mind the much worse situation in those maquiladora factories. They are facing such dangers that this is not. Plus, look, it looks terrible. Maybe that's the problem with this project, that it looks this way. But there's a counterweight here, so it's not us. It's like military helmet is probably worse than this. Still, your perception is important here, and perhaps that's this weak part of the project, that it looks this way. But at the same time, the situation is so horrifying, and the things they say are so painful, that somehow there's nothing really nice, and the equipment that needs to be developed to make transmission of such powerful and difficult substance, has to look this way. It's just the amount of equipment needed itself that you have to carry for this particular project is kind of frightening. And not for you, I guess, not for them. So the issue is what is more important here? The fact that those people can make use of this project to make their own lives a little better, and they have relation to their own lives more clear for their future, and also do so on behalf of others who cannot be part of it, who, for the reasons I explained, or maybe more. So there's a kind of agency and mission. So they just take all of that on themselves, and they are doing it, and that's the project. their project. So is that part you have to weigh against the way you perceive it, you know. So for some reason, lots of people were standing there in the rain for several nights and listening to and looking at this over and over again without leaving. And I don't think they really enjoy it. So there was maybe something else going on there. Maybe they felt obliged to stay. Maybe they wanted to be witnesses there. Maybe I don't know what it was. Was not nice or whatever. But there was something about this Rabola animated this way that some people found also beautiful. So the Cyborgian, or you say Orwellian reference here, well, this is an Orwell turned against himself, because in fact it is the Ministry of Love that didn't have windows. This is all of that hidden stuff that came out. So let me say, maybe it was tyrannical in some ways. There's a danger of this bed paresia, you know, that someone, what Foucault was writing, was a tyrant of opinion, what de Tocqueville was talking about. You know, that might be a problem. There was just too much that they took over. But it's temporary. This is for 2-3 nights. And it's the most vulnerable people you can imagine. To get them to this side of a projection was already an operation. They live in shacks without electricity and water. Sometimes even the roads don't get there, especially when there's rain. So, sure, they became actors and major actresses in this horrifying and the same fascinating city of Tijuana. So I don't know what to say. I only speak around it. I can't do anything about your perception. And maybe some people had perception like yours, and some people didn't. Anyway, I'm glad that I'm learning those things from you. Take it into account for other projects, definitely.
Is it on? Okay. Hi, Krzysztof. I am really challenged by your work. I think it's spectacular, the idea of creating apparatuses with which people who often have very little voice can speak. I'm curious to hear you say a little bit about people who actually do have a voice, and maybe apparatuses by which those people, as an audience to this, might deal with their perception of the trauma, right? So you have sort of an audience and a speaker situation here. We're looking at these people's traumas. We're witnessing and the trauma that they're embodying. And yet, at the same time, we have to deal with that somehow. We have to deal with their trauma, right? And I think that one of the challenges and one of the things that maintains what I'm understanding your conception of negative peace is the inability to interpret other people's sort of embodied pain and trauma. And so I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about technologies or apparatuses for sort of flipping this and doing the opposite, for people who are witnessing other people's trauma to better understand it.
This, in some ways, happened through the same apparatus with war veteran projects, because those who witnessed, those who didn't go to the battle, but they were at home, and they had on the home front of the same war. So they were, in fact, I didn't have time to really present various voices, but you remember, John, there were some people who really were speaking about their condition of dealing with the returning soldiers, with actually taking care of them, and also children. In Holland, and I don't have this material here yet, didn't put it together, there was actually 2 children speaking about what they went through with the parents, fathers, coming back from war. So in that sense, that apparatus already was open to secondary trauma, if that's the right term here for this. But I didn't develop specifically what you suggest. So that is a very good suggestion, to, especially because those who are survivors of survivors and who are also what they called support system, like hospitals. Well, let's talk about cancer, for example. Every hospital now will tell the spouses of the patients that they are important support system. But there is nothing done really for them. And in other words, those who are the support system cannot even voice their own trauma, dealing with traumatized patients, because it's a kind of blackmail. It's a morally not appropriate, right, to bring yourself as a survivor as well. So I think that would be very important to imagine the projects, architecture, design projects, or maybe prosthetic kind of cultural, psycho-cultural equipment for those who support those who are going through hell. It will be a real challenge because of our moral kind of stereotypes, standards that silence those people. Since families of veterans almost never speak in public. They talk about them, but they really are always behind. But then I think there's another issue is about speech. It's ear. And this is, what you are saying suggests that perhaps there is a room for projects that will be not about kind of utterance, the act of speech, but act of listening. That's what Foucault was not really addressing in his Fearless. It was a translation. It was not his term, free speaking, but it's translated fearless speech. But there was no room for fearless listening. The fearless listening is somehow suggested, encouraged through those equipments for immigrants, for example, because it's easier to come closer when there's a strange object like this. That in the name of being curious about the object, you actually get close to the immigrant. To two immigrants, in fact, one recorded and one real. So in that sense, it suggests that, but it's not designed specifically for this. It's not an ear that you propose to non-immigrants, right, to listen. So let's thank you for your maybe unintentional suggestion or intentional suggestion, both.
Have any of these interventions that you've done proved sustainable, either through accessibility or through policy?
Sustainability.
An example would be if veterans come back next week and they have an issue, can they get the Humvee and go represent? Or did some politicians come and make
continuing in the frontline service? Well, I don't have those options. Although one could imagine the kind of cultural, psychocultural, or political clinic for them on a continuing basis. In fact, I'm perfectly aware of the need for this because I spoke with in the Veteran Administration Hospital in Denver. The second largest unit in the hospital is psychotherapeutic. There are 300 psychotherapists in that hospital. And they are kind of half employed. And the hospital is not really employed because many of those veterans don't go there. They don't get there until they are really in a very bad shape because of various factors, psychological factors, cultural factors, and other factors. They don't seek help. So this person a doctor told me it would be great to have an ambulance, so it will help us to seek those people and find wherever they are, because they are hiding. They're homeless, and they will never come here on their own. And if this ambulance could have psychotherapeutic unit combined with dental unit, because that would be easier to gather those people, because when somebody has a pain like this, we'll definitely not refuse. So I didn't have funds and budget to really, I was very serious about it. It would be great to do that. So the issue is, where are we going to get funds for projects that require a longer process of development, like most of them first, and then longer process of being used, and even transformed and redesigned in the process? That's a big issue. Maybe it's part of this is the role of the museums to really, as a part of their program, to somehow, since they are large, the institutions that have various departments and capacities also maybe to, I'm imagining, maybe dreaming, but, or large festivals, or the kind of larger cultural institutions, since we don't have Ministry of Culture, but we may gather money from various sources as institutions. Anyway, I have no real answer to this, but I would like if those projects were really sustainable. Absolutely.
I have a question for you, but I'd like to actually ask a question to the audience first, which is, could I just see a show of hands? How many people here are military veterans? We got one, we got two. Okay. You know, I love your work. I love it aesthetically, and I love the nobility of your mission to spread and share freedom. But I wonder about sort of I want to sort of frame it as an artistic question. You know, talking to artists about war and things like that, they're not so necessarily engaged as the people who actually were themselves in combat. Like, would it not be more appropriate to sort of ask the questions in terms of, you say you want to share the people's stories who have been there and get them to talk to others about what it was like? Wouldn't it be better doing that sort of like at a car show, or just some other sort of cultural gathering that is less, and I hate to frame in these words, but sort of like less culturally elite and more of the people? And I'm sorry for those phrases, but it seems like a lot of this seems to be targeted towards the sort of intellectual elite, as opposed to either the people who actually fight the battles, or the people who are so into themselves that they're in the political end of things.
Well, it's typical because in Eindhoven, it was part of the festival, the Light Festival. So most of the projects there were for entertainment of masses of the entire city. Like once a year, they don't sleep. They just enjoy as much as they can those several weeks of spectacles. So it was part of it. I was very uneasy for me to take part in it, but at the same time, it was exactly what you would like. Everybody was there. It was not for elite. So I like festivals, because even if they are cultural festivals, art festivals, they still carry certain tradition of Athenian festival, Dionysian festival. I don't know how it happens, but still there is a room for things that normally are not allowed to be done, and there are like a Brechtian kind of audience. You have representatives of various strata mixed. Yes, elite, and everybody is there, and everybody is actually seeing each other being there. Maybe even there are some contacts at best in front of those projects, discussions or arguments. That's what I hear. So it's not as bad as you think in terms of being locked into art world. In fact, it is a way out of the art world in many ways. Plus, art world also is not that simple. Some of my projects are in galleries and museums as well. I don't show it here. But there are lots of people coming, like in Chelsea, mass of people are coming. They are, of course, not the poorest part of the city, perhaps, but it's free. We don't pay tickets. So, I mean, the character of the project is public by the way of engaging public issues, confronting issues that ought to be public, but they might be kept as private. And secondly, engaging people who have no access to public space or no media, or their voice is not expected to be heard in those places. So this is important. If the money comes from art institution, it's fine. If it's cultural, it's a festival, it's okay. If it's from the city, kind of cultural projects, it's also good. So, or an educational institution, which also happened like in St. Louis, it's also possible. So I don't have, it's just maybe, I am definitely one leg in this art world, no doubt. Another half in academic. I don't know what's left of me, but and I'm everywhere, so as much as I can. So in other words, I see your problem, but it looks this way. But in Liverpool, it was really no elite there. Once it was in front of FACT, the Art and Technology Center, but otherwise they were actually young people who were nervous whether they should sign up to the army or not, reprimanded by some veterans. So it's difficult. It's difficult to say who is going to come to those projects, but they do have trace of art institution organizing, and that's for sure. But sometimes it's not bad either, because you can get away with lots of things, because you are art institution. Art is treated in a conflictual way. It's between reality, something real, something fictitious, something serious and not serious. And actually, maquiladora workers or veterans or homeless people, they're very happy if the meeting took place in art institution or museum. For them, it's also a way to reconnect with culture. So that's their own also strategy to connect with us. I don't know, but again, didn't really answer to your question, but I try to take it very seriously because of a perception that it is an art elite project, and I have to defend myself here. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to chime in and just say thank you for both an agonistic Q&A and conversation.